Hello, wine lovers! I am Raslava, sommelier and wine educator, your guide on this journey through the world of wines, spirits, and cocktails. The apple harvest is wrapping up in our area, with apples of all varieties in abundance. This seems like the perfect time to talk about cider, about fresh, sparkling apple cider. For centuries, this beverage has delighted people. Technologically speaking, cider is essentially an apple wine. In fact, the Germans call their version Apfelwein, saying true to its wine-like nature. North Americans, however, have a habit to assigning old European names to unrelated things, while giving new names to the original items. So in North America, unfiltered apple juice is called cider, and the alcoholic cider is known as a hard cider. But today, we are focusing on the real deal, alcohol-based cider. It is difficult to pinpoint exactly when people first started making cider. After all, you live surrounded by apple orchards, the idea of fermenting apples probably comes naturally. The earliest written evidence of cider production comes from works like geography by the Greek historian and geographer Strabo around the end of BC and the beginning of AD, and natural history by the Roman author Pliny the Elder, early AD. Pliny mentions apple wine production in the Mediterranean, while Strabo refers to cider-like beverages being made in regions that now correspond to modern-day Spain and France. Of course, neither France nor Spain existed as countries back then, but it does not affect our story. Kingdoms may rise and fall, but people have been making alcohol beverages for many centuries and will continue to do so. For a long time, it was believed that cider was unknown in England until William the Conqueror brought back his rule and cider with him in 1066. However, recent research has shown that the Romans, during the early AD expansion, encountered cider. It was now England. Perhaps cider production declined after that, only to experience the research with William the Conqueror's arrival. So Spain, along with Portugal, France and England, are considered the original homelands of cider and the keepers of the crafting traditions. Up until the 11th and 12th centuries, in the apple-growing regions of France, Spain and Portugal, cider production and consumption were more widespread than grape wine. But over time, wine became the dominant drink. Cider is a more delicate beverage and harder to store than wine, which may have contributed to the wine's rise in popularity. Today, cider is made and enjoyed globally, with varying degrees of popularity. We can even talk about a cider renaissance. While it may not surpass wine, interest ties to cider is growing and new varieties are emerging in both traditional cider-making regions and places that have not historically produced it. Today, England leads the world in both cider production and consumption. Other renowned traditional cider regions include northern Spain, Asturia, Galicia, Cantabria, and the Basque Country, and northern France, Normandy, and Brittany. However, cider can be found in nearly every part of the world where apples are grown. Now, let's talk about apples. Both table apples and special cider apples are used in cider production. Cider apples typically have higher levels of sugar necessary for alcohol production, tannins for astringency and aroma intensity, and acidity to ensure freshness. The tannin and acidity level vary depending on the variety of apple. Cider makers choose their apples based on local traditions and the intended flavor profile of the cider. Some producers exclusively use cider apples, others use table apples, and some combine the two. Often, a blend of many different varieties is used to achieve a specific taste, although sometimes only one variety is chosen. England provides an interesting case study in different tradition. The country is split into two camps when it comes to the apple use. West County producers typically favor cider apples, creating strong, tannin and aromatic ciders. On the other hand, cider makers in Wales and East England often prefer table apples, resulting in softer, more delicate ciders. According to regulations, a beverage must be primarily made from apples in order to be labeled as cider. However, the required percentage of apple content differs across the countries. For example, in France, cider must be made entirely from apples. In the US, at least 50% of raw material must be apples, while in England the minimum requirement is only 35%. Nevertheless, the Campaign for Real Ale Camera, as an independent British consumer organization that advocates for traditional alcoholic beverages, argues that the real cider should be made from at least 90% of apple juice, with the remainder being other fruits or berries, such as pears. Pears, however, stands for their own in the cider world. England, France, and Spain traditionally produce a pear-based equivalent of cider, known as a piri, or puree in France, or pirada in Spain. These days, other countries in Europe and the New World also produce piri, often labeling it as a pear cider or piri cider. For purists in the homeland of piri aren't particularly fond for these terms. I tend to agree. If there is already a unique name for it, no reason to simplify or unify it. Cider is essentially an apple wine, so it's made using winemaking techniques. Apples are harvested from trees, ground into puree, and then pressed for juice. This juice is fermented in vats, either with wild yeast strains presented on the apples or by adding specific yeast strains. The fermentation process must be carried out at low temperature, between 4 to 15 degrees centigrade, to preserve the delicate apple aromas, similar to how white wine is made. Due to the low temperature, fermentation takes longer, usually around 3 to 6 months. Shortly before all sugar is consumed by the yeast, the cider is transferred from the ley to the clean vats, allowing fermentation to continue. This stage gives the cider its liquor carbonation. Once fermentation is complete, the cider is filtered, bottled, and ready for consumption. This is the basic method for cider production, but certain modifications may be made depending on the type of cider being produced. Cider is incredibly versatile, offering something for every taste. The alcohol content can reach anywhere from 1% to 13% alcohol by volume. In some countries, cider alcohol levels is regulated. Canada, for instance, mandates that cider must be between 2.5% and 13%. In other places, the alcohol content depends on local traditions and on producer preferences. Cider can either be clear or cloudy, depending on the filtration process before fermentation and the varieties of apple used. Its color can also vary dramatically, from nearly colorless to deep brown, with all shades of gold in between. For example, this New York Stocks Draft cider is completely clear and has a pale straw greenish tint, while another New York cider, Beckhorn Coral, is also clear but pale golden. In contrast, Normandy Clos Normand has an amber hue, and the Irish cider Craig's is very cloudy, ranging from amber to brown. In terms of sweetness, ciders range from bone dry to quite sweet. Mass-market ciders tend to be sweeter, while traditional and craft ciders are often drier. Most ciders are ready to drink soon after fermentation ends. They are typically consumed young, and the year of the harvest is not displayed on the label because it's assumed to be the most recent harvest. However, some ciders may age up to 3 years, occasionally in oak barrels. For instance, aging in oak barrels is traditional for Basque ciders. When ciders are aged, the harvest year is often shown on the labels, as in the case of this Irish cider. Ciders can be still, like many Basque ciders, but the majority are carbonated. Mass-market ciders typically get their sparkling from adding CO2. The most traditional approach is making quick bubbles through the natural secondary fermentation in the closed vat. Sometimes sugar is added at this stage to increase carbonation, following the same tank method used as sparkling wine like Prosecco. Some high-quality cider are even produced using the traditional champagne method. This Normandy's Brut cider is a great example of such. Asturian cider producers in Spain have a unique method for creating bubbles. Asturias is responsible for around 80% of all Spanish cider, with a history spanning at least 20 centuries. Most Asturian ciders are still, but the traditional serving method introducing bubbles in the glass flavor don't last long. This ritual, known as Rensselaer Inculin, involves pouring the cider from the highest possible height, with the bottle held high in one hand and the glass held low in the other. Ciders with added flavors are also quite popular. Fruit ciders, for example, are made by adding fruit or berry juice during or after fermentation. Common flavors include cherry, blueberry, and cranberry, but producers are only limited by their imagination. Hop ciders is another variation, where hops are added during fermentation. Hops gives the cider a pleasant bitterness. An example is New York hop cider. Spiced ciders are made by adding spices at different stages of production before, during, or after fermentation. Every October, the American market sees a flood of pumpkin hard ciders that contains pumpkin juice and a blend of traditional pumpkin pie spices like cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, and ginger. These ciders are both fruity, if you count pumpkin as a fruit, and spicy, capturing the flavors of autumn. Ice cider, also known as apple ice wine or cidre de glacé, has been around since 1989. It was first created by Quebec winemakers, inspired by the production of grape ice wine. Since then, the idea has spread to other countries with suitable climate for its production. A long, cold winter is essential for making ice cider, which is why it's now produced not only in Canada, but also in parts of Europe and the USA, particularly in Vermont. The classic method for making ice cider is called clear extraction. In this process, apples are left on the trees until temperature drops down below 0 degrees centigrade. As they are exposed to sun, wind, and cold, the apples lose water while concentrating their sugars and aromatic compounds. When the temperature falls around -15 and stays this way for at least 3 days, the apples are harvested, pressed, and the concentrated juice is collected. This juice is then fermented at lower temperature for about 6 months. The process is labor-intensive, especially the harvesting. In some cases, apples are picked in the fall and stored on outdoor shelves, making the winter harvesting a bit easier. However, the more common method is clear concentration. In this approach, apples are harvested in the fall and stored until winter. Once pressed, the juice is left outside for about 6 months. As the water in the juice slowly freezes, ice crystals form on the top while the sugar concentrated juice sink on the bottom. The ice is discarded and the juice is then fermented at lower temperature for around half a year. The end result is sweet, highly aromatic cider with an alcohol content of 9-13 alcohol by volume. Because the process is labor-intensive and requires about 5 times more apple than regular cider production, the ice cider tends to be quite expensive. Ciders are incredibly versatile, offering a wide range of flavors and styles to suit any preference. From sweet to dry, still to sparkling, there is something for everyone. Beyond just enjoying cider on its own, there are also some great cocktails made with cider. In addition, cider is a raw material for apple brandy, with 2 famous examples being Calvados and Applejack, topics we will definitely cover in future videos. Today, I have something a bit more unusual, Titan Wind from Titan Cider Works of East Washington. This is a dry cider that's been fortified with apple brandy and aged in bourbon barrels. Fortified cider is quite rare. In fact, aside from Titan Winds, I have not come across many others. However, in the northeast province of France, Maine, Brittany, and Normandy, which are renowned for apple brandy production, there is a traditional drink called pommeau. Pommeau is made with fortified apple juice with apple brandy and aged in the oak barrels, resulting in a sweet beverage with the natural sweetness of apple juice. Titan Cider Works drew inspiration from the pommeau concept to create their own fortified cider. Eastern Washington is famous for its apple orchards, primarily producing table apples, but cider are produced there also. The owner of Titan Cider Works is a true enthusiast of his craft. The company grows a wide range of apple varieties on their own orchards, including French and English cider apples, Old American varieties, and even crab apples, allowing them to craft the perfect blend for each cider style. They also grow pear for Perrier. Titan Cider Works offer a solid selection of ciders, which are focused on dry varieties, which is great for someone like me who prefer them. However, they also cater for those with a sweet tooth by producing sweeter options. Every year, they experiment with new and exclusive cider varieties. The range includes fruit cider, home fusion cider, Washington is a major home growing region after all, sparkling cider that made they use traditional method and oak aged cider in the Basque style. So let's try this one. This one for you, this one for me. The amber color came from aging in oak. Strong aroma of apples, mix of crisp green apples and ripe red ones. Dry, gentle, silky, refreshing. Taste of mix of different kind of apples with light vanilla aroma. Very nice cider. Stay with me, subscribe to my channel. Feel free to ask questions and don't hesitate to support me. Cheers!